Welcome in, Pennsylvania. It's another edition of What Really Matters. I'm Gary Sutton, along with Republican candidate for governor Charlie Giroux. And Charlie, we start each week with a couple words or one word. This week it's independence. And I thought, what a great word to start with this week, because Declaration of Independence was done in this great state, in Philadelphia. But the idea of independence really came to me because I was thinking about, doesn't everybody want to say, I'm independent as a Pennsylvanian? I want to do something with my day. I want to be left alone. And yet, as I look around, dependence has kind of slipped in there a little bit into the conversation. You're going all over the state right now talking about being the governor and talking to people about issues. What is the balance point between independence and dependence here in the state of Pennsylvania for citizens?
Well, the key, obviously, Gary, is individual liberty. And every citizen that I've talked to wants more individual liberty, more freedom, more opportunity to decide for themselves and their families what's best for them, more opportunities to keep their hard-earned money rather than sending it to Harrisburg or Washington, and to decide for themselves how those hard-earned dollars are spent. And that's really at the core of who we are as a people. Mm-hmm. That's why we're a country. It's because we fought for independence. The whole Revolutionary War was about independence. And so we created in this country and in this state, because it all began here, a culture that was very different from anywhere else in the world, because we recognized that our right to life, liberty, came from God. It wasn't something that was given to us by some potentate or some, prince or king or president or governor. It came from God, and that really is the defining difference.
I read a quote today from a Swami. His name was Swami Vivekananda, believe it or not. And
I don't
you probably
read
haven't
Swami
heard of him.
every day.
And you don't get to hear a Swami quoted that often, but this Swami said something really interesting. He said, dependence is misery, and independence is happiness. When you talk about independence, you're talking about ownership of things. Sure. When you talk about dependence, you're talking about rentership of things. I think anytime we can own something, our happiness, our livelihood, our liberty, that we're really in business here. Talk about what you do as governor to make sure that we have more ownership and less rentership here in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, and mostly owning our dreams, owning our ability to do for ourselves what works best for us, to pursue our hopes and dreams and ambitions for our future, for our families, etc. When you give people that sense of ownership, you give them something very valuable. Well, I shouldn't say when you give it to them, when you allow them to take that ownership, you give or allow something very, very important. And that really, as I said before, is at the core of who we are as Americans, as Pennsylvanians, and as governor. I'm going to make sure that individual liberty and freedom are at the apex of everything we do. Every time we look at a program, Gary, we're going to ask, first and foremost, does it increase freedom or decrease freedom? Can we afford it? Is it a proper function of government? Those are kind of the three-part tests. But at the beginning, we'll say, does it increase freedom or does it limit it?
It seems to me that any kind of bill that comes along or any kind of law that gets passed, if it's not increasing freedom and liberty and happiness, it's probably not a very good bill at all. One of the things I read the other day that Bill Maher, of all people, said, he was talking about the difference between far left liberals right now and liberals. Now, I don't care what you call yourself, but the bottom line is, he said, when far left liberals started to figure out they're going to interfere with our lives every day, he said, they lost me. I'm thinking a lot of people are thinking the same thing right now in general about government. When you start to interfere in the daily lives of people, you lose us. We saw a lot of interference during COVID by our governor in our lives, and we've seen what the results have been since then. How would you have handled that differently?
Well, terrible interference, Gary. It was arbitrary. It was capricious. It turned out to be mean-spirited and vindictive. We saw what happened in Lebanon County, for example. And that's what happens when you have this big government, we know better than you mentality. Right. And that's really what it boils down to. As governor, I would have taken a very different path. Ron DeSantis in Florida, for a prime example, Kristi Noem in South Dakota, for another really good example, showed us a much better way to go, and it worked. They not only got more freedom, they had relief from the disease, from the Chinese flu and the pandemic, and their economies thrived and continue to thrive. Whereas we were stagnant, we were locked down, shut down, we were kept in our homes, our kids were kept out of school, our businesses were shuttered, none of which really worked. So, and none of which was cooperated with, by the way, with the General Assembly, the elected representatives of the people. And, you've got a very, very different model that I would bring to the governor's office than the one that Tom Wolf and Josh Shapiro showed us.
There are a lot of people in the state who need help from the government. We understand that. I think any time you look at that, you want to be compassionate. as a governor or as a government. But the other part of it, too, is there's a lot of people in the state that count on the government for an awful lot of things. We've drifted in that direction right now. I often kid and say it's like people running to Oz. What would the wizard say? Well, I don't think a lot of us want to run to the wizard, but there are some who do. How do you talk to them? How do you try to say to them, hey, you know what, this maybe isn't the right way to go. We're counting on it too much.
Yeah, and the problem, Gary, is when you get dependence, you get locked into dependence. And that's actually a form of incarceration when you really think about it. You're trapped in this bubble of dependence. And what we've done recently is we've made the difference between working and not working, working for. And so that doesn't work for anybody. The model that works best is, again, to allow people the freedom, the individual liberty to pursue opportunities. So you give them opportunities, you create opportunities. And that's really the function of government at its core, to protect liberty and to create opportunities.
You've heard the talk over and over again about minimums versus maximums. We talk about minimum wages. Many times now we're talking about the minimum wage being raised to $15 by such and such a date. By such and such a date, we'll have to raise it to another number, maybe $20. Point being, we're trying to have government contrive things here instead of letting the natural order take place. The idea that we're trying to take jobs that heretofore were meant for 18 to 25-year-olds as starter jobs and make them life-sustaining jobs, is that a good thing or a bad thing? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, no, it's a bad thing, Gary, and unfortunately it hurts the people that it's designed to help. It's the law of unintended consequences in full view. I don't think there's anybody that really thinks that, I want to raise the minimum wage because it will hurt people. They think that will help, but it hasn't historically. And today, quite bluntly, nobody's paying the minimum wage. Everybody's trying to attract workers, get people to come to work. And so you go into convenience stores and you see signs, $18, $19, $20 an hour to be a cashier or a clerk at the counter. And then that's higher than the proposed minimum wages. That's a $40,000 a year job when you put it out on an annualized basis.
When we talk about independence, we talk about entrepreneurship, too. We talk about people wanting to independently own their own businesses, not work for somebody else here in the state of Pennsylvania. And yet, at the same time, we are one of the highest tax states in the union. We look at the gas prices that we're paying. We look at reasons that people are leaving our state, heading off to the south and southwest, and we wonder why. And yet we say to them, well, but we're still going to keep doing the same thing. You just have to kind of be happy and have liberty and freedom here despite what we're doing. What would you change as governor in that regard to get people to have a chance to be more independent, again, through that entrepreneurial spirit?
Obviously, we epitomize the entrepreneurial spirit. I am an entrepreneur myself, a small business owner myself, somebody that's created jobs through the years and signed a few paychecks on the front rather than on the back. But the key, of course, to economic growth is lower taxes. Because if you tax something, you get less of it. And what do we tax? We tax hard work, productivity, incentives, savings, job creation, etc. And so what do we get? We get less of it. We've got to become more competitive as a state and among the nations of the world, because that's really who we're competing with on the global marketplace these days. And to do that, you need lower taxes, a more sensible regulatory policy, and an end to public corruption, because people aren't going to go where they've got to, quote unquote, pay to play. But at the core is allowing people to keep more of what they earn. Because when government takes those dollars and spends them for us, it not only limits freedom, it also limits opportunity.
When we look, my friend who passed away about a year or two ago, Dr. Walter Williams, used to say, okay, if I take from someone over here who has plenty and give to someone over here who does not, I get arrested for theft. If I do that, my name's Congress or the state assembly, it's a new tax bill. The idea of taking from one and giving to another does not sit well with the idea of independence here in the state of Pennsylvania. And yet at the same time, we want to help people. We want to raise the tide that lifts all boats. And yet at the same time, we don't want to be taking from one and giving to another and redistributing. Talk a little bit about that and how that fits into the independence dynamic.
Walter Williams, the brilliant Pennsylvania economist.
He was.
I served on a board with Walter Williams once upon a time, and he really got to the core of it. If you hold a gun to somebody's head and take their money, you're going to put you in jail. But if you call yourself the IRS or the Department of Revenue and take somebody's money, it's just okay. Look, we understand that death and taxes are the two realities of life, and there's always going to be taxes with us. But the question is, what's the tax policy? Does it allow people to use the leverage of their hard-earned dollars to create a better future for themselves? Or is it, again, this big government, we know better, bureaucratic, expert-driven mentality that's really elitist at its core. And I think that's really part of this, Gary. It's the elites. We never thought we'd have a ruling class in this country, not
Right.
after the War of 1776. But we've gotten back to where there is a ruling class of elitists that think they know better than all the rest of us.
And there's also a new attitude as well that kind of goes hand in hand with that. This feeling of entitlement, that somehow you owe me a living. You owe me the end result. You know, I think what we owe people is as equal a starting point as we can get them. But the end result, I'm not so sure. That entitlement attitude has sifted around not only Pennsylvania, but around the nation. You come across that a lot. That certainly is a hindrance on independence and equality as well.
It's equality of opportunity, Gary.
Right.
It's the chance on a level playing field to compete and to win. It's not a guaranteed result. I mean, anybody that's been in business, any entrepreneur, knows about failure. But the failures ultimately lead to better products, better services, better companies, better outcomes. And so that opportunity is really at the core. And we believe in opportunity and the freedom to pursue those opportunities, not the guarantee of ultimate success.
What's the biggest incentive for people here in Pennsylvania to want to make the state better right now? You know, we said there's a lot of interference being thrown in their way. What would you do to provide better incentive to people to want to say, hey, Pennsylvania is where I want to be. It's where you chose to be a long time ago. What are some of those incentives?
Well, when you watch our young people in particular moving, as you suggested, to Arizona or to Florida or South Carolina or Texas, just stop and ask why. It's because they believe that there's more freedom and more opportunity in those places. So we've got to make Pennsylvania an opportunity state. And again, I'll say it one more time. You do that through lower taxes. You do it through sensible regulatory policy, because regulation is a tax too, Gary. And ultimately, capital votes with its feet. It's going to go where it can do the most good. It's going to go to the places where the greater opportunities exist and where more success is driven.
When you look at the people who need help here in the state, we talk about welfare and various programs like that, and there certainly is a need for that in a lot of places. What's the balance point from your vantage point as potential governor here in what, helping those who need help and those who do not need help playing the system? And there's some of that going on too.
There's no question. And Gary, look, the welfare programs, if you want to define them in that way, have to be for those that truly need them, who are incapable of doing certain things for themselves and on their own.
Right.
But, too often in the past, we've measured compassion by how many people were on welfare, were receiving public assistance. I want to measure compassion by how many people can come off of the welfare rolls, get meaningful jobs, be given real opportunity, and have the freedom to pursue those opportunities.
You look at how do you do that? How do you get to that? Maybe give me one example of a type of thing you would do to help get that kind of opportunity for them.
Well, I mean, a couple of things are have means testing, and more important, have a job requirement attached to public welfare.
Right.
Either looking for a job or getting a job. If you're incapable of doing that, we understand. There are some folks who simply, for various and sundry reasons, can't do it. And we've always said, deserve the public assistance. But for those who don't need it on a long-term basis, and some who are gaming the system, Gary, and don't even need it on a short-term basis, getting them off of the welfare rolls and onto payrolls is the key.
And therein lies also the idea of, we've talked about minimums a lot with minimum wage, minimum things. I hear people say about good paying jobs or okay paying jobs. Whatever happened to the idea of, instead of minimum wage, giving people a chance to reach for a maximum wage, for something higher where the sky's the limit? And that seems to me to be a much more positive message for Pennsylvania. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the old Jack Kemp story, where he was talking to a young person about certain things, and he said to her, well, you aren't in a tax bracket to have that apply to you. She said, no, but I want to be. And that's the key, Gary, is the opportunity to climb the ladder of economic success, the opportunity to do better for yourself and for your family, the opportunity to create prosperity for us all. That's the Pennsylvania I want to help build.
How much untapped Pennsylvania is there right now for people who are seeking that kind of independence, to be their own boss, to have liberty and freedom? What are the things you see that need to be tapped right now that aren't being tapped at the
Gary,
moment?
it's unbelievable. I was at one of the rallies to open things up during the pandemic. And there was a woman there. We all had this shaggy hair. And I said to her, I need a haircut. She said, well, I cut hair. I said, I'll give you $100 right now to cut my hair. And she said, I can't, because I have a license. and they might take my license if I cut your hair. And I saw in her eyes, tears begin to form. She wanted to work. And out there all over Pennsylvania, Gary, are people that want to work, people that want to create their own little business, people that want to start something in the spare bedroom of their house and see it grow into something that goes from Main Street, maybe even to Wall Street, which is happening all the time. So it's unleashing those productive engines from very, very small things. Now, I'm a great believer in small business. I am one myself. I've promoted small business all across Pennsylvania because those are ultimately the great job creators. And those little businesses really would make Pennsylvania flourish like nothing before, but we've stifled the entrepreneurial spirit. We've held back small businesses. We've not listened to what they need to prosper and do better.
You know, we have people that have small businesses not only in rural areas, but in cities.
Oh, yeah.
And you're talking to people all over right now, be they Democrats or Republicans. I know you kind of billed as a happy warrior. And while you hold the principles that make you part of the Republican Party, I know you're also listening to people who are saying, hey, I'm a small business too, but saying to them, it's better for you to be independent than dependent on the government to take care of your small business. Are you breaking through it all when you talk to people like that, who people would say, man, the government's where I got to go. I need the government to do this. You know, when the government has to approve of something, the government's going to collect from you later on, too. Your thoughts on that and the conversation
with every dime goes a purse string. And with every dime goes a loss of control over your individual life, a loss of personal freedom, a loss of individual liberty. And people feel that. And so I think talking to the folks that haven't necessarily been considered Republicans traditionally about that very message is where we go. The Democrat Party has failed them. They're not better off today than they were 30 years ago. The war on poverty, quote unquote, has been a massive failure. We've spent trillions, and yet we haven't dramatically reduced poverty. So I think that asking those folks to look for a second time and to say, would I really be better off with something different, is something that Donald Trump did very successfully. He went to the minority community and said, are you really better off? And a lot of them said, maybe not, because with all the stuff we heard in the media about Donald Trump being such a great racist, he did better among the minority community, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, than any Republican since Richard Nixon in 1960. And he did that because unemployment was way down. Household income was way up for the minority community across the board in the United States. That's the rising tide that really does lift all boats.
And I hope people are looking for that conversation with all of us, the rising tide that lifts all boats, because that truly is the unifying aspect, and I think will give all of us more independence. I know one of the things you're doing of the people, for the people, and from the people is really where you're at right now. And you're actually listing from the people as you put out that phone number every week, and I'm going to continue to hammer away with that. Talk a little bit about what you want to hear from the people and where they can call to give you some thoughts.
Well, I do want to hear from people, Gary, and it's really important to me to listen. And I think that there are a lot of folks out there, and I'm hearing it every day, who really just want to be heard.
Yep.
And they don't think right now that their voice is being heard, or that if it is being heard, it's not being listened to. So I've given my cell phone, my personal number, to every Pennsylvanian. I'll do it again today. It's 717-877-8194, 717-877-8194. A lot of Pennsylvanians have it memorized at this point, Gary. But seriously, call me. I'll listen. We'll talk.
And there you go. And if you want to talk about independence and how to get more of it, give Charlie Giroux a call. 1-877-877-8194 this week on What Really Matters. I'm Gary Sutton. For Charlie Giroux, he's running for governor here in the state of Pennsylvania.
Businessman, conservative, patriot, Charlie Giroux for governor.